Moti, it was just leaked to me that you were a goalkeeper of Beitar Yerushalayim. Yeah. Okay. And our former Prime Minister was Beitar Benyamina. It's a different level, but eventually he made it. I will very briefly just say a word or two about former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert in this context. And as I said, from my point of view, one of the issues is the personal issue, and I hope that Mr. Olmert will also refer to this. But I would like to just give two examples of two prime ministers which were negotiating with the Palestinians. One was Mr. Olmert, who sat for many hours, really dozens of hours, tete-a-tete with the Palestinian leader Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas, versus previous Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who went all the way across the ocean to Camp David and refused to sit with Arafat tete-a-tete. And I think from my point of view it says a lot about attitude and about ability and about what we are talking about, trust. Meaning the condition of Ehud Barak to sit with Abu Mazen was it will only happen after he will agree in advance to my proposal, which I think is a sheer message of mistrust. And again, before I will ask Ehud Olmert to come to the podium, I will reveal to you a conversation that we had before he met Abbas, where I told Mr. Olmert that I know him a bit. I know Abu Mazen at that time better. Since then, I grew to learn and highly, and I am underestimating my highly, but to really highly appreciate Mr. Olmert, which I think was a brilliant prime minister. Don't listen. A brilliant prime minister and really the man who brought us closest to peace, and unfortunately it did not happen. But what I told Mr. Olmert was that knowing him and knowing Abbas, although we're speaking about two total different personalities, Abbas is an introvert guy and Ehud is extrovert, as you know, etc., but they have two things in common. One, that they are very straight and honest, very straight and honest. And two, that they are keen, really keen, historically and personally, to bring a dramatic change to the Middle East and to the relations between our two nations. And what I said, again, and it was based on knowledge, but it was speculation, I told him that I think he will very quickly find what I refer to as chemistry and make trust between him and the Palestinian president, which I think happened. But again, Mr. Olmert will tell his story, and I can only again thank you for what you have done, and maybe thank you for what you will do. And please, Ehud.
Thank you very much, Ron, for your very warm introduction, which I hope I deserve. Thank you very much, Professor, for your very illuminating presentation of the discussions which took place here over the last couple of years. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
No, I mean,
maybe also years,
this
but
is
certainly.
the result of a long-term process here.
But certainly on the last 2 days. Today, by some coincidence, I read a little story in the websites which was very interesting for me in a personal way, but was a very good introduction for a little talk about building trust and personal relations. It had a headline about a new book which was published by former Secretary of Defense Bob Gates of the United States. And the headline dealt with the relations that President Bush and myself had at the time that he was in office and I was Prime Minister. And it says that Bob Gates felt at some critical point that he needs to talk personally to the President to rid him of the exaggerated influence that I had on him as a result of our very special personal relations. To prevent him from doing things in Iran, which Bob Gates was opposed to and which he thought I was leading the President, together, he said, with the King of Saudi Arabia, that we were leading the President to do. Now, I wouldn't describe my relations with Bush as under the title of exaggerated influence. I don't know to say that, and these are not my words, but this was his perception. But one thing can be said, which I would fully accept, is that we did create personal friendship and personal trust, which I thought was essential for a Prime Minister of the State of Israel dealing with the most powerful man on earth. Bring the two sides hopefully towards peace. And this is really the main thing. This is really a fundamental issue. Is trust sufficient? Is trust between two negotiators sufficient in order to reach an agreement? I have to say, candidly, the answer is no. It's not sufficient. Is trust essential? The answer is absolutely yes. So we first of all have to draw a distinction. Professor Jacobson talked about a few definitions of trust, and one of these definitions referred to the mutual interests of two sides. Obviously, if there is no mutual interest, that is, if there is no interest for the two sides sitting for negotiations to reach a certain point, each for his own reason, but that each for his own reason wants to arrive at a certain point which can create a genuine meeting of desires, of interests, then no matter how much personal trust you have, if this is against your interest, you will not, most likely you will not do it. If this is against what you define as your interest, why should you do it? The question is, however, that this is taken for granted in many different ways. If you sit to the table of negotiations, then you are supposed to have an interest which you think is from a different point of view, from an entirely different point of view, from an entirely different perspective, from an entirely different need. It is also the interest of the other side. And therefore, it is worthwhile making the effort of sitting together and discussing it. What is the definition of a situation where the two who hold responsibility, the ultimate responsibility, are not prepared to sit with each other? I leave to you. That immediately, of course, raises a serious question. If those who are ultimately responsible, and I want to say here in brackets, everything depends on the person who holds the ultimate responsibility. I don't care now for the titles. In one country it's a prime minister, in another country it's a president, in another third country it may be a different title, but the person who at the end of the day holds the ultimate responsibility, everything depends on him for two reasons. Number one, because if he will not convince himself that this is what he wants and will do everything possible in order to reach that goal, it is likely not to happen. And then I will add to this, that if he believes that this is his interest, and he has a genuine desire to achieve this interest, there is almost nothing that can stop him from achieving this. But at the end of the day, if one asks me, I would say maybe perhaps this is the ultimate definition of leadership. When there is leadership, there is a desire. There is a perception of what the real interest is. It gives a person an unlimited power that can overcome almost every opposition in a democratic society. In a democratic society. When one asks me, how do I believe that had Abu Mazen, instead of not saying yes or no, would have said yes, and I emphasize, he never said no. Now, this is not unimportant, by the way. This is not unimportant. I know that everyone says, we don't have a partner, the other side will never sign, and so on and so forth. I find it very important to re-emphasize that in numerous occasions I got the message, and I don't betray his trust when I say that Mahmoud Abbas passed the message, don't ever forget, and please remember it when you speak publicly, that I never said no. When the president of the Palestinian community, not in 2008 when we were sitting in similar positions, but in 2009 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13, finds it important to remind me that he didn't say yes, what he says is...
Didn't say no.
Is that he didn't say no, I'm sorry. What it says is, hey, there is still an opening for further negotiations, of course, on that basis, to which I still didn't say no. Because if I didn't say no, then I can still say yes. Don't take it lightly. But since we talk about Dr. Mahmoud Abbas, and since I was requested to focus mostly on my negotiations with the Palestinians, so I'd like to say one general thing, and then I'll go to the Palestinians. I thought that my duty as Prime Minister, my interest as Prime Minister, is to be friendly with everyone who represents a country with which I want to have good relations. That my ambition is to become a friend of every president, of every prime minister with whose country I was dealing. Regardless of whether I may have had sometimes some questions about certain personal expressions of his behavior, of leadership, whatever. Doesn't matter. Not that it solves all the problem, but certainly not being a friend makes it harder. being a friend makes it easier. Why not? The responsibility of a leader and of a prime minister is not to fight with his friends or with those who he wants to be friends with, but rather to try and convince them to be friendly. That creates a much easier, friendlier atmosphere when you meet with them. He allows you sometimes to raise issues which under more tense circumstances becomes very difficult. And it leaves always a certain space for extraordinary things that are very important for the national interests that you represent. I'll give you an example. Not about the Palestinians. Then I'll move to Mahmoud Abbas. I was friendly with Romano Prodi when he was president of the European Union. By the way, I made an agreement with them about the exports of goods manufactured in the territories in a manner which was acceptable to the interests of the State of Israel and to the standards set forth by the European Union. It wasn't easy. Lots of people in my country and in my party at that time, I was then a member of Likud, were very critical of my decision. But I thought that this was the best possible solution for the Israeli interests. And I made an agreement which drew a distinction between goods manufactured in the territories, about which the European countries said, we made an agreement with Israel, but we don't think the territories are part of the State of Israel. Now, whether I liked it or I didn't like it is a different matter. The fact was that the Europeans said, look, you can't dictate to us what we recognize as the State of Israel. We recognize the State of Israel within the framework of the borders of 67. Beyond it, we don't recognize it, so it's not part of the agreement. If it's not part of the agreement, it can't receive all the tax exemptions and the duty exemptions, which are part of the agreement. While negotiating it, with the support of the Prime Minister against the position of many of the ministers in the cabinet, by the way, Prime Minister Sharon, I became friendly with Romano Prodi. He was the president of the EU. For the EU, it was an issue which was hanging on for many years, and they were becoming restless and impatient, and they say to us in no unclear terms, listen, guys, enough is enough. You don't want to make an agreement? Everything will be taxed. Everything will have to pay duty. Is that what you want? And I negotiated it with some of the commissioners, Patrice Lama and others, and at the end of the day, it came to Prodi, and we completed it, and he was very happy for his achievement. I was very happy that I resolved the problem, and so on and so forth. At that time, Prime Minister of Italy was Berlusconi, with whom I also created friendship, particularly when I told him that I am the greatest fan on earth of AC Milan. I don't know whether he believed me or not, but I think it was a good opening. Why not? For the sake of good relations with the Prime Minister of Italy, I am ready to be a supporter of AC Milan, which was a great soccer team at the time. When I met with Prodi, he told me, when I will retire from the European Union, I'm going to run for Prime Minister again, because he was previously Prime Minister, and I'm going to beat Berlusconi. And sure enough, I was elected Prime Minister, and a month or 2 months after that, Prodi ran against Berlusconi and defeated him, and became Prime Minister. Now I had a friend who is the Prime Minister and a friend who is a former Prime Minister. One day, at the end of the Second Lebanese War, I get a telephone call. Romano Prodi is on the line. And he says to me, Prime Minister, I need your help. I asked him, what is it? He says, look, you asked me, and I have worked it out with the Europeans, that an Italian army will be in a position in the south of Lebanon as part of the agreement which you support so much to have international force to prevent any recurrence of the hostilities. I support it. I don't have a majority in parliament unless Berlusconi will vote for it. Now, you are a friend of Berlusconi, but he hates my guts. There is no way that he can give me the victory of passing this resolution unless you'll talk to him. I called Berlusconi. I said, Silvio, listen. We called each other on first names, which was very, very, let's say, not unimportant. Not unimportant. It's not Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister. It's Ehud, Silvio. I almost got him a coach for AC Milan, but at the end it didn't work out. Never mind. So I told him, Silvio, listen, you have got to do something which you don't want to do. But I ask you, I'm your friend. You are a friend of Israel. You are my friend. This is essential for me. I can't conclude this confrontation without an international force. The Italians have to be there. It has to be approved by Parliament. Prodi doesn't have a majority. You can provide them a majority. Israel wants you to do it. And I ask you personally, please do it. Within 48 hours, there was an approval of Parliament. Now, how much of the personal contact and the personal friendship was essential for this resolution, I don't know. One thing I can tell you, it didn't hurt. So why not? Now I'm coming to Dr. Abbas. Dr. Abbas was a hard case. Now, no, look, you have to understand now something, which I always tried to explain myself. I was not the one that created the idea that there ought to be peace between us and the Palestinians. At some points in my career, some people, including my dear friend, my really dear friend, Ron Pundak, thought that I was entirely on the wrong side, and maybe he was right. But I was on a different side. I came to this years after the Oslo Agreement, years after so many encounters with so many Israeli leaders and Palestinian leaders, which yielded nothing but more bitterness and more distrust. So when I came into the picture, I had to assume from the outset that there already at that time was such distrust that in order to convince the other side that we mean business, it's not enough to have formal meetings. There must be something that will change the spirit, that will make the two sides feel on a human dimension more comfortable. Like, you know, and it's strange, we feel this way when we talk with Americans most of the time, or with British. Now these are our neighbors. They live next door. They can smell us, we can smell them. And yet, due to historical circumstances, due to the fact that for so many years they were occupied, and I'm not going now into the who is to be blamed for the historical circumstances which created this situation. One thing I know, that they feel occupied, that we feel that they don't have democracy and one leadership that can dictate everything to everyone, and they are divided between extremists and terrorists and moderates and so on and so forth. And there is not an atmosphere of comfort, of relaxation, which is the basis upon which you can build some more personal relations that will lead to trust. I try to pass the message to Mahmoud Abbas that I want to meet with him. And there always was an excuse that he couldn't make it. I remember that at the time that Dr. Yossi Belin, at that time he was the head of Meretz, came to me in the Knesset and he says, "Why don't you meet with Abu Mazen? He wants to see you." And I said, "Look, I knew Abu Mazen before. I knew him at the time when Sharon was prime minister, and there were a few meetings with the president that I participated in. And I participated in Aqaba, in the famous trilateral meeting, including the President of the United States, and so on. And I met with him privately before when I was Vice Prime Minister, so I knew him. And I say to Dr. Belin, listen, go to Abu Mazen, go to Mahmoud Abbas and tell him I'm anxious to see him any day, tomorrow, any place, I want to see him. Didn't work. So finally, I reached out for him, and we decided on one meeting, and it was cancelled, on another meeting, and it was cancelled, and so it went on and on and on and on. It was almost the end of 2006, and yet I was actually in power since the January 2006, because Sharon collapsed in the 4th of January 2006, and since then I was in power. Now it's December, and yet we didn't meet. Finally, we set a date. I remember the date. It was Saturday night, the 23rd of December, and it was to be held as a dinner in my home, in the home of the Prime Minister of Israel, with my staff and his staff. And when we set and planned of what is going to happen, we say to ourselves, this time, no matter what, we will not let it skip from our grasp. We have to have this meeting. Friday at about 10, 11, 12, there is a telephone call. Saib Arikat is on the line. He calls Shalom Turjuman. That's where his very positive contribution started. It's long before this event. And he told me, Saib Arikat says that President Mahmoud Abbas wants to speak with him. And we all said, Oy vey, he probably wants to cancel the meeting tomorrow night. And I got President Mahmoud Abbas on the line. And these guys, my staff, waved to me, don't give in, no matter what, don't let him escape this meeting. We have to have this meeting. And for 45 minutes we were talking, and he explained to me that he needs to be in Gaza, and that the Hamas is about to give him Gilad Shalit, and therefore it is essential that he will go, and we will meet another time. And I say to him, President, Hamas will give me Shalit long before they will give him to you. What are you talking about? Let's have this meeting. When nothing helped, and really nothing helped, and I could see the desperation in the face of my assistants sitting in the room and listening to my beggings and beggings and beggings of Dr. Mahmoud Abbas, I suddenly said to him, okay, President, I understand. I understand that you decided to insult me. And you know what? What can I do? If that's what you decide, I have to accept it. I know that you have bitterness over so many years, over so many different occasions, over so many different arguments, and so on and so forth. So you now want to say to the Prime Minister of Israel, go to hell? Okay, you want to insult me? Fine. But tell me, why do you want to insult my wife? There was a complete silence. Now I'm telling you a real story. There was a complete silence. And after maybe 20 seconds, which is a long time on a telephone call, he says to me, Mr. Prime Minister, do I want to insult your wife? I don't want to insult your wife. I said, President, since yesterday morning when I told my wife that you are going to be the guest at a dinner in our home, she is standing on her feet and cooking the food that you like. And now you tell me that you don't come. What am I going to say to my wife? Tell me. There was silence for another 20 seconds. Afterwards, the president said, I come. I don't want to insult your wife. This was an official meeting, not a social meeting, so my wife was not supposed to take part in it. But naturally, when he came, she came down from the second floor and she said, Mr. President, I just wanted to shake hands with you. And she shook hands. And later he told me, some people told me that she is a lefty. Maybe she is more to our side than you. I said, we'll find out. At the end of the dinner, it was a long dinner, an interesting dinner. I will not go into details, largely because I'm going to write it in my memoirs, which will be published and sometime. But the important thing was that at the end of the meeting, I asked the president if he minds coming to the study. I want to talk to him in 4 eyes. And when we were sitting there, I said to him, you know, Mr. President, I know so many things about you because, you know, you're a public figure, you have been to the PLO, you were with Arafat, you were elected leader, you know, you are in the center of events for so many years. You know about me, perhaps less, because I wasn't that prominent for so many years, but I was the mayor of Jerusalem, I was vice prime minister, we met before, I'm now the prime minister. I went through some difficulties over that year anyway. We don't really know each other personally. Let's, if you don't mind, let's meet and just talk about ourselves. No politics, no agreements, no arguments. I want to hear about your family. I want to hear about the son that you lost. I want to hear about your grandchildren. I want to hear about your family. I want to tell you about my children, what their desires are, how they live, about my grandchildren. Let's be friends. And it turned out that in the first few meetings, this was most of what we did. We talked about ourselves. And subsequently, we started to talk about the issues. And from day one, on that same evening, before he left, I also told him only one thing. President, remember one thing. There is nothing which, from my point of view, is outside the framework of negotiations. Anything that you will want to say is legitimate. I will agree or I will disagree with you. I will accept or I will not. But everything is on the table. Jerusalem, refugees, territories, security, everything. Just remember this. And we hugged. And he left. And that started a process. We said 36 times. Now, of course, the Americans were very, very curious and interested and active. And I have to give a lot of credit to President Bush and to Secretary Condi Rice. She wanted to be very active. From day one, I said to her one thing. Secretary, negotiations will be direct, without anyone else in the room. Just me and him. If we can't work it out ourselves, no one will do it for us. I don't believe that negotiations can become productive, constructive, and fruitful and lead us into the outcome that we desire if we need a principle from the outside to bring us together and to interpret us and to analyze one to the other and vice versa. That doesn't work. That can't work. That won't work. I don't need, you know, when sometimes I'm asked, what do you think? This guy wants peace, the other guy wants peace. I said, look, I don't know. I think that both sides want peace, okay? I believe that both sides want peace. I'm absolutely certain, and I am serious, and I'm not making any light comment here, that the Prime Minister of Israel wants peace. And I'm absolutely confident that the President of the Palestinian Authority wants peace. How can they achieve peace if they don't sit together? How can they achieve peace if the most passionate person in this context is the Secretary of State of the United States? I don't see the restlessness, I don't see the impatience, I don't see the desire, I don't see the ambition that every day that passes is a lost day. We must sit today and we must do today what we had to do yesterday rather than do tomorrow what we could do today. So the personal contact, I said before, may not be sufficient, but is essential if we want to achieve that breakthrough that will overcome the bitterness, the distrust, the failures, the disappointments which have characterized this process since the days that Ron Pundak and Mr. Hirschfeld were negotiating the first agreement between Israel and the Palestinians that led to the Oslo understanding that was inaugurated in the White House. So I think that of the three types, in a way, and Professor, I hope you'll bear with me and you will not be offended if I say these are, you know, artificial distinctions, because trust which is not based on a common interest is entirely irrelevant. If I like you, but there is a dispute and I don't think that I want to resolve it and you don't think that it's your interest to resolve it, what difference does it make whether I like you personally or not? So a common interest is essential. It is essential for both sides. But if there is no trust, this common interest will not express itself in the personal contact between those who have to take the decisions and will not lead to the ultimate agreement, which is the desire of both sides. Because, you know, you can say, okay, this is my interest and this is his interest, and we actually may want to come to the same place, but I don't trust that what he says is really what he means. How can I sign an agreement with him? And this is always the excuse that is used by the two parties, each against the other, in the context of the Israeli conflict and in many other conflicts which are negotiated. Not in every conflict there ought to be a personal contact of this nature. And you have mentioned the recent agreement between the P5+1 and Iran. There certainly was an understanding of both sides that they want to achieve something that will bring them together. Perhaps will not resolve at that point the entire issue, but will reduce the tension and the danger which has characterized this conflict for a long time. But there was not a history of personal bitterness, not personal experiences of personalities involved that required a personal trust of this nature. But there ought to have been a trust in the understanding and interpretation of what the interests are. In a conflict like ours, between two neighbors, when the leader of one nation was born in Tzfat, and many of the Israeli leaders were fighting in the territories which are under dispute, if there is not a personal trust, there can be no agreement. If there is personal trust, there is a basis upon which an agreement can be built. For a personal trust to exist, there must be a personal contact. If a personal contact is not established, whether because of genuine reasons or because of excuses created by one or two sides in order to avoid the framework that may lead to peace, there will not be peace. And as I said before, no one will ever be able to say that I meant anything personal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just a word of conclusion. Do you want to say something from the organizers? So I will just say again, thank you very much, Mr. Olmert, and thank you for your coming, and thank you very much, Moti, and Eli, and clearly Ephraim. And on a personal note, since you came, both of you, to run the center has done huge things. And you know, in the name of the community, we really appreciate it. Thank you, and thank you for the foreign guests who came here. And again, let's hope that next time we'll sit here, we'll be at implementing peace. Although I have my skepticism, but why not end in an optimistic message? So thank you very much.